All right, welcome everybody to the February 14th meeting of the Clean Water Board. We'll start out today. I'll go over I'm Douglas Farnham, I'm the chair of the board. We'll go over the agenda for today. We just have on our consent agenda, we have our December 5th meeting minutes. Then we'll move into our first section with Secretary Moore on the review of the FY25 Clean Water Budget recommendation. Let's just be a quick review. Then Nick Kramer from the Department of Finance and Management will go over the operating statement. And we'll spend a bit more time on the Clean Water Fund Contingency Reserve Plan. Again, that is, well, I'll leave that to Emily to go into more detail on that. But after that, the recommendations on the water quality trading report, and then we will move into public comment and do a little bit of wrap up at the end. Any questions or comments from the board before we move into the first area of reviewing the FY25 budget recommendation with Secretary Moore? All right, seeing none. Julie?
Sure. I thought I'd actually share a screen. Emily, I have that summary we put together for Senate institutions yesterday and just felt like it might be a little easier for folks to see than the detailed spreadsheet. And I've got that open. So if you bear with me just one moment, we'll bring this up.
Thank you, Secretary Moore.
You're welcome. Hopefully folks can see my screen at this point.
Yes.
Fantastic. So this is just a reminder of sort of the sources of funding available to support clean water this year. The budget went in exactly as the Clean Water Board had recommended into the governor's recommend. And so I think it's just important to maybe pause for a moment and reflect on the sources of funding that comprise our almost $48 million budget this year. Much of it is Clean Water Fund base. We projected almost $26 million, and this will come into play again, I think, when Nick provides his update on the operating statement. We are taking advantage of some one-time funding that fell to the bottom line due to overperformance of some of our funding sources in FY23. That this sort of part of the budget is down though from FY24. As you may recall, we had 3 years where we received $10 million a year of ARPA funding to support clean water work. We counted that as one time, programmed it as one time, but it is not in the FY25 budget. The FY25 capital bill is different than we've seen in past years. It was reduced by the legislature in approving the capital bill for FY24 and 25 last year. Typically, we've seen $10 million. This year, we're proposed to see $6 million. And that funding or that gap is being made up with the remaining unallocated, unreserved revenue balance we had in the clean water account. And then at this point, we're projecting about $8 million of direct federal funding through the Lake Champlain Basin Program that as a result of past good work by Senator Leahy. We do have one other slide just to show you, remind folks how we ended up balancing those capital bill pieces with one-time clean water funds. We tried to keep individual lines sort of whole with a single revenue source to the extent possible, but we did split the ag agency water quality grants to farmers across the capital bill and one-time clean water funds. I will stop sharing my screen there. Happy to answer any questions, but expect there may not be too many since it does largely, or it does identically, I guess, reflect what the board had recommended to the governor last fall. All right, Doug, happy to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Secretary Moore. Emily, I am struggling a little bit. Could you run the agenda for me today? I would really appreciate it.
No problem. I hope you feel better. So next on the agenda, thank you, Secretary Moore. We have Nick Kramer from Department of Finance and Management, who will be reporting out on the updated Clean Water Fund operating statement. Nick, would you like me to share screen or would you like to do that on your end? Happy to do it.
Emily, if it's okay with you. Hello, everybody. Nick Kramer. I think I'll try to drive, just
Okay.
at risk of making folks nauseous here. Let me try to pull up my screen.
Thank you, Nick. Sounds good.
All right. So, of course, I can no longer see anybody but Emily. But Emily, give me a thumbs up. Are you seeing what I'm seeing? All right. Awesome. So yeah, hi everybody. Nick Kramer, Department of Finance and Management. Probably familiar face to most everybody on the board by this point. My role in this process, right, is to keep an eye on the clean water revenues from a high level and help to integrate the good, thoughtful work of this board with the governor's recommended budget. As Secretary Moore just alluded to, this year was pretty uncontroversial, as is typically the case, right? There is a lot of intensive public process that goes into crafting this budget. So the governor's recommended budget reflects entirely the Clean Water Board's recommendation this year. As always, this Clean Water Fund operating statement, I think, has a lot of information and is a really helpful tool in that vein, but maybe takes a little bit of unpacking if you're not living and breathing revenue streams and operating statements. So what I'll take a couple minutes to do here, as always, is just kind of walk us through each column and talk about what this represents and what changes. I mean, to cut to the punchline, I think the high level headline for this report, for this meeting, is that we're continuing on a downward trend in terms of updated revenue forecasts overall for the fund. Folks will recall, as Secretary Moore alluded to, there are three primary sources of revenue for the Clean Water Fund. There's a small percentage surcharge levied on the property transfer tax. There is 6% of all meals and rooms taxes in the state are diverted to the Clean Water Fund. And then unredeemed bottle deposits. So when you go in and buy a 6-pack of something and there's a 5-cent deposit on each can or a 10-cent deposit on each bottle, if you don't go back and redeem those bottles after a certain period of time, that money finds its way back into state hands and winds up in the Clean Water Fund. So that's the line. It's on parentheses E, entitled sheets. Those are the unclaimed bottle deposits. So collectively, I think, as Secretary Moore's slide indicated, I'm not, in the interest of time, I'm not going to walk through every single column. On the leftmost side, there are the FY23 actuals. Those are unchanged since this board last met in July. I put them there, I think, for reference and because they play into the FY24 construct. But essentially, you will see three different columns: orange, blue, and green. The orange column represents what we knew as of this time last year. So that's when you will recall this board would have just presented the Clean Water FY24 budget. It was included in the governor's recommend. It was working its way through the legislature. Those numbers reflect a year ago what we knew. The blue column represents the information that was gained based on the July e-board forecast update, which anybody who was here in July will remember was not great for the fund. You can look at the FY24 revenue section up here and see the clean water surcharge dropped by a little over $1 million. We picked up $1,000 in a reversion. The sheets, there was a discussion about tweaking the estimate there to reflect actuals, so we bumped those up a bit. And then the meals and rooms tax, that was an increased number as of July. So I guess overall, actually, not a super substantial drop, but a small drop in revenue. That's essentially what has continued with the January e-board forecast update. That's the column in green. So you can see the clean water surcharge drops from $7.9 million total to just under 7.7. The reversion and the sheets are unchanged. We're on track to meet both of those assumptions, but meals and rooms has also seen a downgrade of a couple $100,000. So overall, we dropped from $25.9 million in anticipated revenue for FY24 to 25.5. So about a little under $400,000 decrease. And the way this shakes out in the context of the budget is, so here down below in the base appropriations and one-time appropriation section, this is where the actual expenditures recommended by the board show up. It's a little complicated because this document, being an operating statement, treats certain appropriations a little differently from others. Ag and the Lakes and Crisis Fund in particular are technically different state special funds. So what shows up as just a line item in the clean water budget for those two particular items shows up on this document as a transfer. That's in this section below. That can be a little bit of a head scratcher at first. I know it took me a while to get my head around that. But so really, if you want to get a sense of the totality of the clean water budget in a given year, the thing to do is to look at this base appropriations total, plus we've had this one-time appropriations construct for starting in FY24 and continuing through FY25. That's to utilize prior year unallocated unreserved surplus when the fund overperformed expectations and accrued a balance. The board thought, well, we should be spending down that balance, getting the money out the door on critical infrastructure projects, but we know that our revenues may not be at a certain high level in an ongoing way. So let's program those into the budget as one-time funds. I think much of what I'm saying is repetitive and most folks will remember this, but I think maybe a helpful refresher. So the bottom line for FY24 with our current revenue picture, if you take all of the base appropriations, add to them all of the one-time appropriations, that's a subtotal here on line X of 28.8 million. You add to that $8.8 million that's contained in these other transfers. And what we are budgeting currently for FY24 is I'll say preliminary $5 million deficit. That means spending is $5 million above anticipated revenues. The rationale for doing that, and that's only slightly increased by a little under $400,000 from the construct as of July, right? $4.6 million projected initial deficit. The idea being to start drawing down the $13.4 million that was sitting on the bottom line as of the end of FY23 in the fund, right? So the big update for FY24, the current fiscal year that we're in, is based on new revenue projections. The deficit is slightly higher than we thought. Instead of ending the fiscal year FY24 with $8.8 million on the bottom line, now we are projected to end it with about $8.4 million. And that's on line AI here, the very bottom. So that's FY24. That final ending balance is an important figure because it plays into the construct for FY25. Again, this orange column represents just the revenue estimates we had for FY25 at this point a year ago. The blue column represents what we knew as of July. The green column, what we know now based on the revenue forecast well, not an upgrade in this case, update last month. The same thing that happened in FY24 is happening in FY25. Slight contractions in the clean water surcharge, slight contractions in the meals and rooms tax. These sheets are unchanged. So whereas we were, and I think this was reflected on Secretary Moore's slide a second ago, we were projecting 25.7 in overall revenue. That's now down to 25.49, a little under 25.5 million. The appropriations, like I said, are unchanged between the board's recommended budget and the governor's recommended budget for a total of 24.4 million in appropriations. Add to that 9.1 million in transfers, and the projected deficit that we were showing, that's in this blue column, as of July for FY25 was 7.8. That has now grown to $8 million. So you subtract $8 million from the projected $8.4 million I just mentioned. We're on target to have at the end of FY24. And hypothetically, at the end of FY25, so June 30th of 2025, the fund would have about $348,000 remaining. So effectively spending down that 3.4 million at the end of FY25 over the course of 2 fiscal years, which I believe was the board's intent. I'll make a couple last editorial comments on this, just as a somewhat neutral, just fiscal analyst tangentially involved in this process. I would say that this board's decision to program one-time funds as one-time was clearly prophetic, given what we're seeing happen with the revenue contractions. These last 2 columns show FY26. You can see more contractions down the road here. So I think that was a really fiscally prudent decision. And the last thing I'll touch on, and I don't want to jump ahead in the agenda here, because I think Emily or Gianna will probably speak to this in more depth, but we are going to talk about the contingency reserve. And just for anybody that's looking at that $348,000 projected at the end of more than a calendar year from now and thinking, we're seeing continuing revenue contractions, downgrades of the forecast. What happens, Nick, if we continue to contract and all of a sudden that projected surplus turns into a deficit? Well, I think there's a number of answers to that. One of the first being that this contingency reserve, which was increased in FY24 from 500,000 to 2.5 million, can serve as a temporary cushion for that if we were to get into a situation. Obviously, if contractions were significant, I think the board would want to seriously take a second look at the budget and maybe identify other levers to pull. But those are numerous, and there's other folks on this call better equipped, I think, to speak to those. I'm just, as the steward of this document, pointing out that I think some of the recent actions taken by the board were pretty far-sighted in that regard. So with that, I'll stop, and I'm, as always, happy to answer any questions or clarify anything as the case may be.
Thank you, Nick. Nice overview. Any questions from the board about the operating statement? Jim?
So Nick, just make sure I understand correctly. So you're showing the 2.5 contingency reserve as an expenditure, but really it's there as a reserve. So one could say the total uncommitted is really the 2.5 and the 2.5 million and the 348,000. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an astute question, Jim. That's another head scratcher that took me a long time to wrap my head around the way operating statements are laid out. Because yes, you've got revenues showing up as a number, you've got appropriations, expenditures showing up as a number. That line AF just represents the balance in the reserve. On line AC in 2024, you can see where we show the transfer of the additional $2 million into the reserve as an expenditure. But yes, it's accurate to say that including the reserve, we would have the 348,000 plus 2.5 million available. But in terms of, semantics and the definition of unallocated, unreserved, that's just the 348,000, if that makes sense.
No, thank you.
Great.
Thanks, Jim.
Emily, I'd add one thing on to Nick's presentation. The trends as you can see from the operating statement, lines E and F, the sheets and the meals and rooms tax, they're not performing extraordinarily well, but they're still performing in a relatively consistent manner. The property transfer tax really is a symptom of, during the pandemic, all of our inventory went through essentially in the real estate market. And we're down to less than a quarter of the real estate inventory. So that particular revenue source is undergoing some kind of extraneous situations right now. There are a lot of proposals in the legislature and from the governor to try to fix that long term. But that inventory problem isn't going to be solved within the next year or two. It's a longer term issue to try to get your real estate inventory back up to a healthy level. Hopefully within more like 5 to 10 years, we would be at a healthy real estate market. So I think that's something I want the board aware of, that drag on the clean water surcharge, because it's linked to overall property transfer activity, that's likely to take a while to recover from. It's a volatile revenue source, so I could be wrong. We could see a surge, but there are actually no houses to sell right now in Vermont. So I think that's the other two, luckily, are pretty stable revenue sources, so they balance out that instability a little bit.
Excuse me, Secretary Farnham, do we have any idea how low that will go? I mean, 7 million, what is the bottom?
It's unlikely to dip too far below the current level, primarily due to just the reaction of supply and demand. The median house values are inflated right now, and so we're seeing fewer transactions, but at a higher dollar value, mostly well and above what a normal Vermonter could afford. So we have a rather unhealthy housing market right now. The possibility of a full crash, like in the 2008-2009 timeframe, I don't think is a reasonable risk. I think it's an extremely low risk of any type of the bottom falling out on the market. Even in 2008 and 2009, when the real estate market in the rest of the country dramatically crashed, we saw a much softer crash in Vermont, and we also saw a slower recovery. So our real estate market is kind of muted as compared to the rest of the country. But the pandemic did introduce a new factor for us, which was we have climate migration, and we had public health migration as part of the pandemic as well. We were seen as a safe place to live during the pandemic, so there were a lot of purchases to live here temporarily.
Thank you, Doug. I see Bob has his hand raised.
Yeah, just for what it's worth, Doug, we track housing sales for Windsor and Orange counties. So the number of sales for 2023 was basically the same as 2022. Obviously, nothing like during the pandemic, but still way above what it was 10 years ago, and more like probably 2018-ish, 2017. So, I concur with your point. There's less inventory, but the prices sort of make up for that a little bit.
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there's
Any other
no other
questions?
I was just going to pull down the report if there's no other questions.
I'm not seeing any. Thank you, Nick.
Sure.
All right, the next item on the agenda is to review the draft updated Clean Water Fund Contingency Reserve Plan. And I'm going to attempt to present the slides in Teams. Hopefully this works smoothly. Okay, can folks see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, so the next item on the agenda is to review the Clean Water Fund Contingency Reserve Plan. This was originally presented to the board at the February 22nd Clean Water Board meeting last year, and we received some helpful input from the board, and we're revisiting it today. So I'm going to kind of take you through the updates of this plan over time, and also provide a little bit of a level set on what is within the plan. And then we'll open it up for board discussion and for you to entertain a motion to approve the plan today. All right, next slide. So the contingency reserve plan has been in place for the Clean Water Fund since 2018. And when it was originally established, the reserve balance was at $500,000 a year, which at the time represented about 10% of the annual revenue going into the Clean Water Fund. And the reserve was established to maintain a positive cash balance in the fund in the event that revenue would underperform compared to what was projected and appropriated on an annual basis. And then in cases where if revenue overperform, it set up a process where the unallocated unreserved balance would be programmed in the next state fiscal year clean water budget process. So that was the original 2018 plan. And then in 2023, we worked on making updates to the plan, and the board reviewed this at your February board meeting last year. And the update to the plan was to add a secondary purpose to the plan, not just to guard against revenue underperformance, but also to cover risks related to clean water project loss, which we'll get into in a little bit more detail later in the presentation. And it also made reference to the updated balance in the reserve, updating it from $500,000 to $2.5 million. That was a recommendation of the board that went into effect in state fiscal year 2024, representing that the Clean Water Fund annual revenue has grown significantly since it was originally established, and now $2.5 million better represents about 10% of the Clean Water Fund's annual balance. Okay. And then since the board reviewed the plan last year, we've made a couple additional updates. We went back to the plan and made some refinements with your helpful input. First, we wanted to clarify and emphasize the plan's intent and the value of holding a contingency reserve to mitigate risks. We've learned a lot over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the interest of providing stability to the Clean Water Fund and the programs it supports, really emphasizing the importance of risk mitigation, and also to clarify that the Clean Water Fund is an indirectly managed special fund, which means that it can't really be managed on an expenditure basis. And that means that we really need to rely on managing the fund balance on a revenue and appropriation basis. And so having that reserve provides even more stability given the nature of this special fund. So that's emphasized and outlined in more detail in this updated version. We also added process and considerations for the board to recommend changes in the reserve balance. So rather than stating that the reserve balance would be $2.5 million, we indicate that the board may recommend change in the reserve balance as part of the annual clean water budget process. So giving the board more autonomy to evaluate risk and to recommend changes to the reserve balance on an annual basis. And then finally, the updates help to clarify and refine the process for the secondary reserve purpose to guard against clean water project loss risks. Okay. So now I'm going to walk you through each of the plan's purposes. So with the updated plan, the Clean Water Fund Reserve Plan is not just focused on guarding against revenue protection anymore. It also has the secondary purpose of helping to mitigate risk of clean water project loss. So first, I'm going to walk you through some background on revenue underperformance, and then we'll get into the clean water project loss piece of the plan. So the primary purpose of the plan is to guard against revenue underperformance and to maintain a positive cash balance in the Clean Water Fund to avoid and minimize risk to expending more funds than revenues available in any state fiscal year in the case that revenue were to underperform. And just for context, the fund is set up where revenue projections for the upcoming state fiscal year are the basis of our annual budget targets and appropriations. So actual revenue are accruing in parallel with the implementation of each state fiscal year budget. And so in cases where revenue underperform compared to what was projected and appropriated, then we run the risk of the Clean Water Fund approaching a negative cash balance, which would have a number of program impacts and would require the Clean Water Board and the administration to reconvene and propose a budget adjustment. So having the reserve in place really helps to reduce risk to program impacts. This clean water budget supports a number of funding programs and partners across multiple state agencies. And so by having this risk mitigation, it helps to guard against program impacts that would come from spending above those available amounts, and it helps to streamline our budget processes by minimizing the need for mid-year budget reprioritizations. And there's a bunch more additional detail that's outlined in the plan on pages 3 through 4 that really help to articulate the risk mitigation benefit. Okay, next slide. Okay, so to provide a little bit of additional context, here is a graphic, figure 1 in the plan on page 6 of the plan, and it basically illustrates how this reserve would get applied in the event that it needed to be applied, and how that would play out across multiple state fiscal years. But in the interest of today's presentation, I'm just going to zoom in on state fiscal year 23 as an example to kind of walk you through the application of the reserve. So using state fiscal year 2023 as an example, we go through our annual budget process that has milestones where we revisit the Clean Water Fund operating statement that Nick just presented. And this basically gives the board and stakeholders an update on how revenue are trending compared to what was originally projected or appropriated. And so at the close of the state fiscal year, we are able to look at the actuals, the actual revenues and balances that represent the close of the most recent state fiscal year. So using state fiscal year 2023 as an example, at the end of the state fiscal year, we would get our updated operating statement and would determine the revenue appropriation balance at the close of the state fiscal year. And depending on what that balance looks like, there would be different implications for the reserve. In the event that revenues overperformed, the board would program the unallocated unreserved balances in the next state fiscal year budget process. So using close of FY23 as an example, that would roll into state fiscal year 25 because we'd be building that budget that following summer. So that's if revenue overperform. And in the event that revenue were to underperform, if it's within the balance or equal to or less than the reserve amount of $2.5 million, then we would activate the reserve to maintain a positive cash balance in the fund. And then that reserve balance would get replenished in the next state fiscal year budget process. So in this case, close of state fiscal year 23, we need to activate the reserve to maintain a positive cash balance. That reserve would get replenished back up to the $2.5 million balance we're currently operating under out of state fiscal year 2025. And then in the event that the revenue underperformed greater than the reserve amount, so greater than $2.5 million, then the reserve would be insufficient to maintain a positive cash balance, and the board would need to reconvene and adjust the recently closed or current state fiscal year budget, really revisiting those financial commitments and better aligning the appropriations with the updated revenue projections. And as Nick had mentioned in his last presentation, there may be cases where the severity of a downward trend in revenue would warrant looking at some budget adjustment across multiple state fiscal years, because there may be cases where the reserve would be insufficient to really balance the fund, and we'd need to look at our budget commitments more holistically. So that's how the primary purpose of the Clean Water Fund contingency reserve is structured and how it would be applied. The secondary purpose of the Clean Water Fund contingency reserve is to guard against risks related to clean water project loss. So I'm just going to walk you through what that means and how that would be applied and processed. So the secondary purpose of the reserve is to avoid and minimize risk of losing pollution reduction performance of clean water projects that are contributing to meeting our water quality targets. In particular, the targets that the clean water service providers are assigned for phosphorus currently in the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog basins. And if projects are lost or fail due to eligible circumstances, things like natural disaster, acts of God, negligence of folks other than the clean water service providers, that's all outlined in clean water service provider rule, then those project losses may be eligible for funding, one-time funding out of the reserve. And the reason why we're setting up this secondary purpose for the reserve is that the state of Vermont is really relying on the Water Quality Restoration Formula Grant Program and the clean water service providers to meet the non-regulatory portion of our pollution load reduction targets that are necessary for us to meet total maximum daily load targets. So if a project is lost or fails, then its pollution reduction performance is also lost, and we're no longer able to claim that project's credit toward implementing our targets. And if we did not have the reserve and the ability to reallocate funds from the reserve to contribute to covering project losses, then we would need to redirect funds that are intended for implementing new projects, making forward progress on our water quality targets. We would need to redirect those funds to help restore the lost project performance. And this could slow down the progress of us meeting our water quality targets. So in the case where there is project loss, the board may choose to allocate reserve funds to restore the lost project pollution reduction performance. And in this case, use of the reserve funds may partially mitigate that project loss by effectively spreading those costs across the whole clean water budget, rather than those expenses being borne solely by the Water Quality Restoration Formula Grant Program. And in the event that the reserve funds would be activated to support project loss, then in the subsequent state fiscal year, it would the process would be that the reserve balance would then be replenished with a future year's budget target. So that's at a high level, the overview of the secondary purpose of the plan and the reserve. So now I'm just going to walk you through a process chart. This is figure 2 on page 10 of the contingency reserve plan. And this puts the process for applying clean water project loss funding in the context of the clean water budget annual process. Okay, so first piece of the process that I'm going to zoom in on is a reporting process. So each year, the clean water service providers will report to DEC. They'll submit an annual report to DEC, and that annual reporting would include any instances of project loss based on their verification program. So once a project is constructed, then there will be verification on a regular basis to confirm projects are still operational. And in the event that a project was lost, it would get reported to DEC. And each year, DEC would review reported instances of project loss and determine if it meets the eligibility for this project loss funding that may come out of the reserve. And this would happen in early summer. And then DEC, as part of the annual clean water budget process, would make a recommendation as to whether one-time funds should be allocated to cover a clean water project loss associated with the formula grant program. And then that would get rolled into this next section, where that is part of the annual clean water budget process. That would get rolled into the budget development work that we help to facilitate with the interagency work group, and to present a draft recommendation to the Clean Water Board for their October board meeting. And then as part of that October board meeting, the Clean Water Board would review and approve the draft budget and prepare it for public comment. And then we'd move on with the public comment period, the standard budget process, so on and so forth. But within that October board meeting step, we've built out in this graphic of a process for the board to consider clean water project loss funding. So the board would review the proposed budget, and that would include any recommended one-time funds for project loss, if applicable. And if the board prioritizes funding project loss recommended through one-time funds to cover project loss rather than out of the base formula grant program, then the board would consider whether it would be appropriate to allocate funds from the reserve to cover project losses. And considering in doing so, the board, we recommend, would consider first, is there a risk that revenue are going to underperform, because the primary purpose of the reserve is to guard against revenue underperformance. And so based on the economic outlook, the way things are trending from the Clean Water Fund operating statement, consultation with Vermont Department of Taxes, would want to assess the risk of whether the reserve would be necessary to be activated to guard against revenue downswings. If the board is feeling comfortable that that's not a likely case, then it may make sense to allocate funds from the reserve as a one-time reallocation from the reserve to the formula grant program to cover project losses. Or the board could decide that the risk is not tolerable to allocate funds from the reserve and allocate one-time funds out of the upcoming fiscal year budget target in order to cover project loss expenses. If the reserve is activated to cover project loss, then the next state fiscal year budget process would be when the reserve balance would be replenished back to its operational value. Okay, and this next zoom in section reflects a scenario where the board would deprioritize funding project loss. Perhaps the board considers the requested project loss one-time request against other clean water budget priorities and deprioritizes project loss. In that case, any portion of the project loss that is not being covered by an increase in the formula grant, a one-time increase in that formula grant program, would be covered within the base formula grant line item. And DEC would adjust the formula grant targets using our fund allocation methodology to adjust targets down to reflect the fact that some of those funds have to be diverted to restore the lost projects rather than implementing new projects. So that's how the process would fit with the proposed process would fit within the annual clean water budget, and how some of these decision points for the board would be structured. And then finally, I just wanted to give you an overview of what we envision the administrative approach for clean water project loss to look like. So similar to what we just went over, the board would recommend project loss funds within the annual clean water budget process. So really relying on the existing annual budget process and not creating extra processes over the course of the year to be able to respond to project loss needs. And then DEC would be responsible for administering and determining eligibility and prioritization of use of these project loss funds, since we oversee the water quality restoration formula grant program in general. DEC would also determine how those project loss funds are allocated across formula grants in the event that there's multiple instances of project loss across watersheds and grants. And we would use the formula grant targets and fund allocation methodology that's already in place to help guide that prioritization and allocation. And then in the case where we have a significant event, project loss has been reported, but it's sort of in an emergency basis or a time-sensitive basis, that couldn't be supported by the annual clean water budget process as it currently stands. The department, we'd still consult with the Clean Water Board on the allocation of funding to support project loss, but we'd work with Department of Finance and Management to obtain necessary authorizations for those expenditures to be able to occur on a more rapid basis if that were to be needed, depending on the nature of the emergency or the time sensitivity of the project loss. So that should hopefully help to summarize at a high level what is baked into the contingency reserve plan. I should have said it right at the top of my presentation, but I had some summary slides here. The actual updated reserve plan is in your meeting materials, and we've highlighted in yellow the sections where there have been substantive updates and edits. So hopefully that made it a little easier to go through and refer to where things have changed since the February board meeting. So with that, we'll open it up for questions, discussion from the Clean Water Board, and happy to answer any questions. And then I think we'll also entertain a motion from the board to approve the plan if we're ready for that today. Any questions? Jim?
I guess I'm a little confused as to what approve the plan means. Does that mean that we're tying our hands into the future, that we can't change it if circumstances evolve, showing that we need to do something different than this laid out process?
Sure, that's a great question. I think the plan is absolutely open to updates in the future. The Clean Water Board advises. I think the goal of having an approved plan is it gives us something to operate under in the case that any of these scenarios would arise. It has some protocols outlined, and it also provides some transparency to the public and our stakeholders on how these situations would be managed from a risk management perspective. But certainly there is flexibility for the board to recommend adjustments to the plan, especially as we learn more and have multiple more years under our belt in terms of best practices for management of this fund. Does that answer your question, Jim? So I don't think it locks the board into this as the plan forever, but it gives us something transparent to operate under in the interim. Welcome input from other board members or Doug or Julie if you wanted to jump into. Thank you.
I might just offer, right? Like this is the true second generation of our contingency plan. It's certainly a far more mature plan. It's also a much more robust sort of contingency fund than we dealt with initially. And I think we're learning as we go. Jim, that's a really good question. And I suspect once we have our first sort of set of project losses that we're looking to fund, or the first instance where the fund underperforms, and have the ability to reflect on how this sort of all works, not just in theory, but in practice, we may want to revisit it and make additional changes or modifications.
Would it be possible to call it guidelines as opposed? A plan to me sounds like it's much more definitive than guidelines we want to follow.
Sure, I defer to Doug on that and other board members, but would be happy to incorporate any edits to help support board approval.
I think that makes sense from my perspective.
Yeah, the difference in naming doesn't give me any real concern there, especially since if you look at the procedure, the board will be making a decision at the time based on the facts in that circumstance. So we're not applying any predetermined outcomes. So it really is a contingency reserve procedure, or I apologize. I was okay with the word you used, but it just completely flew through my head.
Or calling it a guideline, I think was the recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful feedback. Any other questions or suggestions? Okay, well, thank you for your review and your input and your time for us to update you on this guideline. And with that recommendation to adjust the title of the plan to a guideline, I'm happy to make that edit. Doug, would you like me to take us to the next step in the process, or?
I can run this step. Thank you,
Okay.
Emily.
Thank you.
So I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the adoption of the contingency reserve guidelines as updated. Jim,
Approved.
thank you.
Yeah.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Julie? All right. Emily, could you call roll?
Sure. Any discussion?
Oh, yeah, true.
Or, sorry. Hearing none. All in favor? Unless you want me to go through one at a time. Okay.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
All right, no need for roll then. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. The motion is passed. Thank you all for your time and input. All right. With that, I think we can move on to the next agenda item. We have Amy Polachek here from the Watershed Management Division Wastewater Program. Amy is the program manager for wastewater program and will be reporting out to the board on the recommendations on water quality trading report. And special thanks to Amy for her patience. This was on the agenda last February and we ran out of time to get to it. So thank you for your time today. Please take it away. Would you like me to screen share the report or anything else?
Well, I actually am going to try to share my slides, but if you just give
Great.
me a quick second, because I'm operating off of my one laptop here.
No problem.
Gonna go into this slideshow. All right. So thank you for having us this afternoon. My name is Amy Polachek. As Emily stated, I'm here with Kevin Burke. I'm the wastewater program manager in the Watershed Management Division, and Kevin is the stormwater program manager. This report was put together to talk about the department's recommendations regarding water quality or nutrient trading for the stormwater and wastewater sectors in Vermont. The background here, this report stems from a requirement of Act 76 promulgated in 2019 that directed DEC to develop recommendations regarding implementation of market-based mechanisms to allow for the purchase of water quality credits by permittees under 10 VSA Chapter 47, which is the water pollution control regulations and statutes. So the requirement was also that these recommendations shall be developed in consultation with the Clean Water Board and then submitted to the legislature. So that's why we're here today, to share our recommendations and consult with you before we submit our report to the legislature for their consideration. It's important to note that the Act does not require us to actually develop any of these mechanisms, rather that we develop a report on the recommendations regarding the potential for their implementation. So as I mentioned, 10 VSA Chapter 47 are the water pollution control regulation statutes. These incorporate the requirements of the Federal Clean Water Act and create the authority for ANR to protect water quality by regulating discharge of pollutants to water bodies in Vermont, which we do through the use of discharge permits. We have permits for wastewater, stormwater, and agriculture. And these regulations, as well as the Lake Champlain TMDL, separate these into these different sectors. So wastewater includes discharges from municipal and industrial wastewater treatment facilities, stormwater, which includes regulated discharges from impervious surfaces, and then agricultural runoff, which includes certain discharges from farms. So the Permits that we use to regulate these discharges include conditions that limit the amount and type of pollutants that a permittee can discharge to a given water body in order to ensure that Vermont water quality standards continue to be met. The cost and ease of meeting these limits vary by sector and within a given sector. So that's why the legislature really requested that we evaluate the market-based trading opportunities that permittees may use in place of meeting the permit limits directly. So the viability of an approach was previously evaluated in 2019 under a project report titled Assessing Market-Based Approaches for Phosphorus Reductions in the Vermont portion of the Lake Champlain Basin. That report determined that some, but not all, of the conditions necessary to support a program were in place, a trading program were already in place, and that the agricultural sector would generally be the sellers of such credits, and that the developed lands or stormwater sector would be the buyers. So we do have some existing mechanisms that the department already uses to provide opportunities to permittees that equilibrate to trading opportunities and would achieve some of the same goals as the market-based trading schemes would intend to. First, in the wastewater sector, we have what's known as waste load allocation transfer. This allows municipalities that are performing better than their permit requires them to, so they're discharging less phosphorus of their phosphorus waste load allocation, to reallocate some of that waste load to municipality in the same watershed that's not able to meet their waste load allocation. So rather than having that municipality that's not able to meet pursue potentially expensive facility upgrades, they can make an MOU with the facility that's achieving their limits and has some space, and then we would incorporate that into permits. So it's basically municipality to municipality trading, and that involves an agreement between the towns, and then the nutrient reduction that's being transferred and the cost of the exchange would be included in an MOU, and that's memorialized ultimately through the respective wastewater permits that are administered by my program. Another option we have that affects the wastewater sector is integrated permitting. That's where one entity with multiple permits across different sectors, which is usually a municipality with both wastewater and stormwater permits, seeks to reallocate waste load or nutrient reduction across sectors within the municipality. So that creates flexibility for them to meet their overall reductions by maximizing the most cost-effective treatment, be it stormwater or wastewater, because the water body doesn't really care where the phosphorus is coming from, where the reductions are coming from, so long as they happen. And this is where I'll turn it to my colleague Kevin Burke, who will discuss the more stormwater focused opportunities that exist.
Yeah, thank you, Amy. Appreciate it. Nice to have the ability to be here to talk to stormwater. My name is Kevin Burke. I'm with the Vermont Stormwater Program. I am the program manager. And like wastewater, you know, the watershed doesn't necessarily, or the water body doesn't really care where the reductions come from. But we do have some specific options that exist in the stormwater sector. One is what we have referred to historically as stormwater offsets. And this is where, say, a retrofit project, such as might occur on a 3-acre site that's undergoing a stormwater retrofit to improve stormwater treatment. You know, they're often required to go through an engineering feasibility analysis, but often is the case, they may not be able to provide treatment on site based on that analysis. So in lieu of providing treatment on that site, which might not be all that feasible, they will be paying an impact fee in lieu of providing treatment. It's not an option that they pay the fee in lieu of treatment. First, they must evaluate whether they can provide treatment in the first place. But these payments then can go into a fund to be paid out to other sites or a municipality, public or private entity that might be able to overtreat or develop some other project in that same watershed. So that actually can create some incentives for better treatment opportunities, more cost-effective treatment in that same watershed, and be compensated for providing those improvements. And then again, under the stormwater manual, historically, we've had what's called site balancing, and that allows sites that might have existing impervious on their site that just can't feasibly be treated. It might be a parking lot or something that might otherwise impact wetlands, but they might be expanding somewhere else on site. And in lieu of, providing one, treatment on one portion of the site or the other, they can pick the most effective location for treatment. So runoff from the existing impervious might meet the same treatment standards as the new impervious would. And that can really improve the cost effectiveness of obtaining the treatment, and at the same time without compromising water quality. Understanding that the surfaces that they're going to balance must be comparable. So you can't necessarily trade, for example, a tennis court on the back 40 for a large parking lot that's going in that's adjacent to the stream. There must be some comparable treatment opportunity there.
So in all of these cases, essentially the aggregate water quality treatment across the watershed is preserved, as Kevin was saying, and is often done more cost effectively than strict adherence to effluent limits or permit requirements by every permittee in the watershed. So in short, we have several mechanisms in place that effectively achieve the goals of a water quality training program that we're currently managing through existing legal authority and staffing resources. So another section in our report kind of discusses barriers to creating additional mechanisms. And the first one is really demand. So we're just not seeing demand from the regulated community that's just necessary to justify allocating the time and additional investment required to standing up these any sort of new trading programs. There's interest in our established programs that we're currently administering, but we're not hearing that municipalities or land developers are seeking additional options. Another significant hurdle is timelines. The issue here being that statutory deadlines that apply to the developed land sector are already occurring. And for any new mechanisms to be of value, they would essentially need to be available now. And we know from looking at other states that development takes a significant amount of time, and in some cases, a really, really long time to develop an effective program. For context, we've had some of these waste load allocation transfer processes in place for many years, and they've only been used once in the last 7 years as I've been with the program. And then with the city of Burlington, right now we've been working with them for multiple years on developing an integrated permit to address their 3 wastewater plants and their stormwater utility. So there are dischargers taking advantage of these opportunities already. Further, and of real importance, is the amount of uncertainty around the value of nutrients reduced from one sector to that in another sector. So in other words, how much impervious area needs to be treated in order to balance an additional pound of phosphorus that's being discharged from a wastewater treatment plant. Those things aren't usually considered equivalent because of the uncertainties around best management practices as compared to the actual measured discharge of the effluent of the wastewater plant. So this creates mathematical uncertainty in how you would develop the mechanism in trading ratios. And that math becomes even more complex when you start considering the more labile practices in that agricultural sector, which tend to be annual in nature and therefore increase the uncertainty for their use in credits. So given this uncertainty, we would need to establish trade ratios for the amount of credits that one must buy based on the practice they're using to offset their discharge. And these would not be the same from sector to sector or even necessarily from practice to practice within a sector. And finally, any additional developments would require additional staffing resources. And in short, there's no way to seek out more trading opportunities either without more people or impacts to our current services. And that's just the reality of the workload that that these programs have at this time. So ultimately, our recommendations are that the mechanisms we have in place are meeting the needs that we have identified. And that's coupled with the uncertainty around trade ratios and the low demand, as I mentioned, that leads us to believe that the development of new market-based trading programs is not really necessary or recommended at this time. Now, that could certainly change in the future, but for the foreseeable time, that's our current recommendation based on the conditions that we're working under. And with that, I'm glad to take any questions. I can figure out how to.
Thank you, Amy and Kevin, for your presentation. Any questions? I see Secretary Moore. And then Jim.
I haven't really sort of kept tabs on trading programs over the last several years. Are there any places where this is being done effectively at this point? I know as recently as 3 or 4 years ago, I think people reached many of those same conclusions, that they're just, particularly the uncertainty and the complexity makes them unappealing to the regulated communities because they don't gain that regulatory assurance. But I wasn't sure if in the last several years there are any of these that have kind of launched and are enjoying maybe more significant success.
So in the last several years, I'm not sure, but I think the most valuable example is the Connecticut trading for nitrogen that they put in place, and that had started in the 1990s. And as part of working on this report, I reached out to one of the people that is involved in that trading program that actually runs through their financial departments, not even out of their clean water programs. And it took many years and a lot of people to develop that program, and they have now kind of put themselves out of business because they have been successful. However, it's an example of a multi-decadal and multi-generations of state workers in that program working to make it happen. And it really only was trading between wastewater utilities.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask. I thought that was the case, wastewater to wastewater. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Jim?
No, I appreciate the report, and particularly pointing out that you can't do things without resources. Only question I have is, have in any of Act 250 permits, have these existing rules been pointed out as a problem to development? And if they haven't, I would point that out in your report.
Thank you. That's an interesting comment. It's not something that we would often be privy to because we're only interfacing with the Act 250 permits that are coming for a specific wastewater or stormwater issue, but we could certainly work with the planning department program to understand if that has become an issue that is anyone's mentioned in the last several years around trying to meet the regulatory requirements. So I'll take a note of that and make sure to circle up with Billy Coster before we file our report.
Thank you, Amy and Jim.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay. Well, Amy and Kevin, thank you again for your presentation and for developing this report. We'll stay tuned on the final status of the report, and we'll be sure to share that final version with the board members once it's submitted to the legislature. So thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Great. Okay. With that, Doug, are we ready to move on to the public comment portion of the agenda?
Yes.
Okay. We have a few folks who have signed up to comment ahead of time through our RSVP form. So we'll call on those folks first. And since we have 10 minutes, there's 5 folks who have signed up and we have 10 minutes. So we are going to try to roughly time 2 minutes per commenter, if that sounds fair. And if we should have a little bit of extra time buffer if other folks would like to comment who did not sign up ahead of time. Gianna, are you able to keep time for us?
I am able to keep time, and I can stay off mute so everyone can hear when the alarm goes off, if that's helpful.
Sure. Thank you so much. Sounds good. All right. The first we have James Mullen signed up to comment. James, are you in attendance? Just doing a quick scan of our current attendee list. I
don't see him.
Not seeing him, so we'll move on to our next commenter, Jim Henderson. Jim Henderson. I don't see him either. Albert Perry. Hi, Albert. Are you able to unmute yourself?
How's that?
Great. We can hear you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment. I live in Middlebury, Vermont, and a longtime camper at Lake Carmi on the Canadian border. I appreciate this opportunity and the work of the board and the people at ANR to take care of our public waters. My personal comment don't represent anybody but myself. I believe strongly in the importance of our public waters. They're obviously important to a lot of people for a lot of reasons, but they're also irreplaceable. They're not like roads and bridges or public buildings. We can't build them back very readily. Because of that, everybody, not just the Clean Water Board or ANR or AG, everybody should be concerned enough about our public waters to make the necessary investment, not only to protect them, but to fix those that have not been protected. And I know that's motherhood and apple pie, but I hope that motherhood and apple pie are still popular in Vermont and in our country. And I apologize for the preaching. Today's meeting was encouraging in regard to the action on the Contingency Reserve Fund, the fact that it not only exists, but is being used for obvious reasons regarding shortfall in the finances, but now was regarding shortfall in the results. And I would like to take this opportunity to point out that, from my perspective, we were a long time coming to the game or to the party or whatever you want to call it of really taking care of public waters. It probably started 20, 25, 30 years ago with EPA focus and action and subsequent action by the Vermont. But more recently, in the last 10 years, I think we may not be on a roll yet, but I think we're all pointed in the right direction and trying to work together. With that said, it's concerning that this year's clean water budget is less than last year's clean water budget. And I think it's fair to say that the need for clean water spending is not less this year. It continues and I believe is growing because of shortfalls and performance, the climate change effects on our successes or on our ability to change things. So I would advocate certainly for the changes in the reserve fund, but I'd also advocate, ask the board to consider increasing the clean water reserve amount. As I say, I think we were late starting this game. It's a never-ending game. We're never going to finish, but we can make progress and make things better all over Vermont. But it'll take more funding. It'll take more action from the administration and the legislature and all the agencies. And I apologize for preaching, but I'll hope you'll join me in this commitment for a long-term commitment, a long-term plan, more than a one-year budget, so that we can, if we can't make the necessary investment this year, we know how we're going to make up for it in the next few years. Just don't keep kicking the can down the road. Thank you very much.
You're muted.
I didn't hear that.
I was muted. I'm so sorry. Classic. Okay. Thank you so much for your comment, Albert. We appreciate your time and input. Next on the list for public comment is Pete Benevento. Hi, Pete.
Hi, everyone. This is Pete Benevento, and I represent both the Franklin Watershed Committee and the Lake Carmine Campus Association. I'd like to thank the Clean Water Board for all their work. I know you've seen my face before. I've attended the last several meetings petitioning for funds for an alum treatment for Lake Carmine, and I'm doing it again. And also for we want to be in a position if it appears that an alum treatment will be recommended for the lake, and we want to be in a position to take advantage of that recommendation and treat the lake with alum. So we need your help. We need your funding. But I'd also like to bring to your attention that yesterday I was on a conference call that lasted a little more than 2.5 hours. And the conference call, the participants in the conference call included representatives from DEC, from the Agency of Ag, from UVM Extension, from the Franklin County Natural Resources Conservation District, as well as the Franklin Watershed Committee and the Lake Carmine Campus Association. And what we did in that more than 2.5 hour conference call was to review 121 projects in the watershed to improve the water quality of Lake Carmine. And those projects included a plethora of lake-wise and stream-wise recommendations of initiatives to do in the watershed to prevent unwanted sediment and phosphorus from entering the lake. So I know I've appeared before you before asking for funds, and I just wanted to let you know that we're trying to do our part too, and to do everything we possibly can to prevent unwanted sediment from going into the lake. But we need the treatment of alum in the lake to treat the phosphorus that's already been in there, that's the legacy phosphorus that's been in there for decades. And that's why I've been before you before. So in addition to asking you for money to treat the phosphorus in the lake, I just wanted to let you know that we're making a concerted collaborative effort in the watershed to prevent additional phosphorus from going into the lake. So between the two of us, we should be able to restore Lake Carmine and make it the beautiful natural resource that it is. So I'll end it with that. And the last thing I'll say, and I hope I'm not exceeding my 2 minutes, is that on February 28th, we are hosting a breakfast at the cafeteria in the State House. So I'm inviting the Clean Water Board and everybody else participating in this call to attend that breakfast and to see what we're doing at Lake Carmi to improve the watershed. So thank you very much for your efforts, and I'll probably see you again at the next meeting. So thank you.
Thank you, Pete. Appreciate your time and comment. Next, we have Peter Berger signed up, or Berger signed up to comment. I just did a quick scan and I don't believe he's in attendance, though. We have one call-in, so I just wanted to give him a minute in case he's here. Okay. Are there any folks who did not sign up ahead of time but are interested in commenting? Members of the public? Feel free to raise your hand if you can, or if not, just speak up.
We have folks in the room, Emily, that would like to
Oh, great.
speak.
Excellent. Hello.
I am Andrea Engelhardt, also from Lake Carmi, and I just want to support what Al and Pete have said. We're all working hard, but we need the state to step in with the alum treatment, and that's going to be expensive. It's past what the local people can do. So thank you for your help, and we hope you have the money for us this year.
Thank you for your comment. Anybody else in the room interested in commenting?
No, not that we can see, Emily.
All right. Okay, I think that concludes the public comment portion of the agenda. Secretary Moore, if it would be appropriate just to respond to the request for funding for Lake Carmi, just to clarify that there is funding that is proposed in the state fiscal year 2025 clean water budget within line 2.4 to support implementation of the alum treatment in Lake Carmi pending the results of the feasibility study and permitting. But just wanted to make sure folks in attendance who have spoken to that are aware that that is baked into the board's recommended budget and the governor's recommended budget pending legislative authorization.
Thank you for that clarification, Emily.
Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is other business, determine next steps and closing remarks. Doug, would you like me to share just a quick update on a few communications items here to get us started?
Please, Emily.
Great. I wanted to make sure that the Clean Water Board and all folks in attendance are aware that our team has submitted the annual Clean Water Initiative Performance Report to the legislature and to the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. That report is due every year to the legislature on January 15th. Special shout out to Claire Madden at DEC, who is the lead author on that report, and her colleague Lauren Sofer. The report is available online and it summarizes the state's investments in clean water, the results of those investments, and also progress implementing pollution reduction targets under the Lake Champlain and Lake Memphremagog phosphorus restoration plans, or total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs. So it's a pretty big compilation of progress and data that we put out each year, and is a great resource if anyone has any questions. There was also a public presentation delivered on the report on February 1st, and a recording of that presentation is available online. So we made sure to send that out to the Clean Water Board members, but if anyone has any questions on how to navigate to those resources, please feel free to reach out. In addition, wanted to make sure folks are aware that the data set that's used to produce the performance report each year is also available online through the Clean Water Interactive Dashboard. That's linked in the agenda along with the performance report. And this is a more interactive way where interested parties can go in, explore the data, filter it, and interact with it. And in particular, you can filter it down to your geographic location and your region of the state. So a great resource. And the presenters, Claire and Lauren, did a quick demo on how to use the dashboard as part of their public presentation on February 1st. And finally, just wanted to highlight that we have launched our Clean Water Conversation series for 2024. It's a monthly webinar series that's open and free to the public. It happens usually on Thursdays over the lunch hour. And there is a link to the Clean Water Conversation in the agenda. And if folks are interested in being notified of upcoming talks, you can subscribe to our Clean Water stakeholder listserv. The next talk that we have scheduled is in early March. I believe it's March 4th off the top of my head. Dr. Matthew Vaughn from the Lake Champlain Basin Program will be presenting on the summer flooding of 2023 and its impact on phosphorus loading to Lake Champlain. This was an item of discussion and interest from the Clean Water Board when we met in the fall. And so I just wanted to make sure you were all aware of that upcoming talk. And again, those details are linked on our Clean Water Conversation website. But I can resend those details to the board members just to make sure you have them. So I think those are my communications related updates for the board. And welcome any other closing remarks or next steps.
Emily, I just want to offer an appreciation for the Clean Water Performance Report and encourage everybody who's on the line today to spend some time with it. It is an incredible resource. It shows progress over time. It shows the challenges I think that lie ahead. But it's honestly a gift to have that kind of information. And I think it reflects the maturity of this program, and want to thank you and your team for putting in such an effort to annually produce such a thorough and useful report.
Thank you for those comments, Julie. Really appreciate it. I'll make sure the team hears your comments too. It is truly a team effort. And I also just want to highlight that every single state agency involved in this program contributes data and input and messaging each year. And we really appreciate the partnership.
Yes, I would only add that, we're using this as a model for how we will track our climate action work going forward under the Global Warming Solutions Act, that this is such a thoughtful and organized framework for bringing information from the whole of state government together. It really is a model. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. So next steps, we'll be taking a bit of a pause from Clean Water Board meetings, but we will be reaching out probably early summer with a projected timeline for the upcoming state fiscal year 2026 clean water budget process, assuming everything goes smoothly otherwise. So please Clean Water Board members keep an eye out for a heads up on what those next steps look like for our next annual budget cycle. And we'll be reconvening the board most likely in October. But we'll be keeping you updated on our progress in the interim. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Doug, if there's any additional remarks you would like to share.
Yeah, I would just like to thank you, Chad, for your service to the board. I think both you and Allison, I think, are going to be rolling off before the fall. And I just wanted to thank you for your service to the board and helping make Vermont's water cleaner. Anything you wanted to offer for the rest of the board?
Well, that I haven't entirely made that decision yet.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So that's okay. No, it was funny to chat with a few people. I was just mentioning with Emily. I was more bringing up the concept of having the public members. I knew initially it was going to be 6 and then got reduced to 4. And I just wanted to make sure that the intent of us being here was being followed through on. And that was the intent, that this is kind of a lifelong anointment. or is it something that we do want fresh blood coming in? Interestingly, when I went back to look at some of the initial, when this was first brought up, I think as a bill, I think age 38 or bringing in these other people, was that the continuity is actually being provided by us because you guys could all change with administration, which kind of made me rethink that a little bit. So really, I think more than anything, I don't know whether on behalf of the other public members here who can speak up as well, how we just felt about that is really the discussion I wanted to start. And yes, I'm sure that immediately got read as my running for the hills, which is understandable, but don't count me out yet. So
Okay.
I'll let you.
Well, sorry for
Thank you.
misinterpreting that. I apologize.
Apologies as well for misinterpretation.
It's good.
We will follow up on next steps there. Neil is coordinating from our shop on the next steps for updating public board member appointments. And also wanted to just acknowledge Allison Conant has made a decision to step down from the board as well with her term running out, and will be working to fill that seat as well ahead of the upcoming budget process over the summer. Neil, not sure if there's anything you wanted to add in terms of process or next steps?
No, but Chad, I'll definitely reach out to you in the next few days.
Thank you.
Until next week, and I'll touch base by email. We can find some time to chat.
That sounds great. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Back to you, Doug.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. That concludes the February 14th meeting of the Clean Water Board. Hope you all have a good afternoon.
Thank you. Happy
Thank you,
Valentine's Day.
everyone. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's
care.
Day.
Bye.
Want to be unplugged, Emily?
In the walls.
You're not Emily.
Yeah.
Yes, so that,